Is it just a MAGA fever dream?
No, I don't think it's a MAGA fever dream. I think this is an unprecedented weaponization of the intelligence community, in the United States. That's what we're looking at. Already today, he's gone in and these are just reports. Politico had something from two sources that he gave an address to employees today at the Office of Director of National Intelligence and said he plans to fire hundreds of people. But I think that's a distraction from the broader fears that you talked about and what Bannon said. I remain convinced that Bill Pulte is in this position as acting director to be in that position, I fear, in November, and to somehow continue Tulsi Gabbard's work interfering in the elections. Again, Gabbard played an unprecedented role when the FBI seized election records in Georgia. They seized a voting machine that they thought maybe had been hacked in Puerto Rico. This is all the 2020 claims that are just false. I mean, we have the sitting president just saying, I won the last election, and insisting it's true when every other sort of branch of government and agency says it's not. And he's putting loyalists in positions like this. It's really, as the midterms approach, it's very alarming.
Secretary Panetta, where do you fall regarding Bill Pulte as DNI? Are you as concerned as David is?
Anytime you appoint somebody who has absolutely no experience in intelligence, no experience at all, comes out of the housing area, for goodness sakes, and the whole purpose of the Director of National Intelligence was to have somebody who's experienced with intelligence who can then try to coordinate the information from 18 intelligence agencies. So now you've got this guy who's virtually a political hack going in. He's talking about eliminating a lot of employees there at a time, very frankly, when intelligence is going to be absolutely critical. We're going into negotiations with Iran. You better have intelligence on what the Iranians are up to. And the only way you get that intelligence is through our intelligence agencies. So I see this more as an effort to cripple our intelligence capability and really hurt our national security.
But what is the intention there? Why would the president want to cripple it?
He wants to cripple it because he really doesn't appreciate what intelligence is all about. He doesn't appreciate the work that goes into it. He doesn't appreciate the people that are out there putting their lives on the line in order to gain that information. He thinks he can basically use it to go after political issues in this country, such as elections. He doesn't really have an appreciation for the purpose of intelligence. We provide the president every morning with what's called the Presidential Daily Brief. That's a summary of all of the threats we're facing in the world that threaten our national security. This president doesn't spend a lot of time reading the PDB. He doesn't spend a lot of time getting intelligence information. He thinks he knows more than everybody else in the room. And we're paying a price for that. I think the deal in Iran is a reflection of a president who doesn't appreciate the information he needs in order to be able to arrive at an agreement that benefits the national security of the United States and doesn't hurt it.
How does he find his way to an agreement that benefits the United States? Is there a way to do that right now after starting this war without continuing the war and further trying to put the Iranians on their heels? Is there a way to do it just through negotiations at this point, Secretary?
Well, it would have been nice if the United States had maintained leverage before going into these negotiations. Instead, we've given Iran control over the Straits of Hormuz. We have given them the ability to sell oil and get as much as $6 billion selling oil. We've set up a $300 billion fund for them. And in the end, we've gotten nothing with regards to their nuclear capability, to their funding of proxies, and to their missiles and weapons that they still have. And so the bottom line is that the United States now has in many ways lost some of the leverage they're going to need to go into these 60 days of negotiation that in the end will determine whether we have in any way succeeded with this war in Iran or whether it's going to turn into a total failure. That's what's at stake here in these negotiations.
Governor, what say you?
Well, Leon's pointed out a number of things that I think are exactly right. I mean, I think we were just first of all, we were in a hurry to get in. And I wonder sometimes, and Leon talks about intelligence, I wonder if the military brass and the intelligence community laid it on the line to the president before he made a decision to go. I mean, think about this for a second. Were they not aware of the fact that Iran had the capability to be able to manipulate the Strait of Hormuz? Did they not understand even that 70% of the missile capability apparently has survived the bombing? I mean, it's just hard for me to understand how they went in there without knowing these risks. And I wonder sometimes if the people who advised the president didn't want to tell him what he didn't want to hear. And so they were more interested, perhaps, in keeping their jobs than they were leveling with the president. I can't prove that, but I've heard some discussion about that. At the same time, how are you going to get a nuclear deal? How are you possibly going to do this in 60 days? I mean, it took the last administration, to come up with the deal that was torn up when Trump became president. It took the Obama administration 18 months to be able to figure out where we were going to be. And it was a deal that it was OK, but it had weaknesses. But it took them 18 months to get there. How are you possibly going to do this in 60 days? And the idea of letting them be able now to sell oil. I don't know so much about this fund. There's just so many questions out there. And frankly, Katie, what is happening now is Republicans are running away. And they're upset about this whole thing around Pulte. They're upset about a number of things, but they're upset about where we are in the war. And you see senators now speaking out clearly because there's a point at which the members of the Senate, members of the House who are Republicans, it's about their survival. And when they look at all this, there's no way for them to go home and explain it. And so I hope that in these 60 days they can figure something out. But if they don't, going back to bombing, I don't see that as an option. So we're kind of in a pickle right now. And I know Leon very well. I've known Leon for 30 years. He and I both pray that America will come out of this okay, but we both are dubious about the outcome.
I think a lot of folks are dubious about the outcome. I'm going to come back to Republican frustration and what it means for them and how they sell it, their own reelection bids in a moment. But let me focus in on the anger that's coming up within the Republican Party regarding this Iran deal. And it's not just coming from the Cassidys or the Tillises, the Murkowskis, or the Collins. Let me play you Tom Cotton, Senate Intel Chair, talking about the deal, the MOU that is currently out there.
I do have concerns that certain aspects of this deal are a step in the wrong direction. For instance, we're going to lift sanctions on Iran's oil exports right away, or $4.5 billion to $6 billion every single month. That's a lot of money. And we know that this terrorist revolutionary regime is not going to spend that money on daycares or on hospital. They're going to use it to rebuild their drone stockpiles, their missiles, to fund Hamas and to fund Hezbollah.
David, is this president in a different position than President Obama was? Is he in a stronger negotiating position? Is he in a position that would allow for him to lift sanctions and fund the Iranian regime in a way that President Biden was not? I mean, we heard a lot from Republicans about how it was crazy to give them any of their money back, even when it was being, funneled through third parties. The money was being unfrozen, but it was being unfrozen in deliverance of certain items. It wasn't like they were getting handed cash. They needed humanitarian aid that was being delivered as part of the unfreezing of the billions or the sanctions or the frozen assets during the Biden administration. Republicans at the time went crazy about it and said, even by just allowing them to get things that they would otherwise be spending money on, you're freeing up money for them to fund proxies, et cetera, as the governor was just mentioning. So my question, going back to it, is this president in a position that we don't fully grasp? Is he somehow doing a better job of this than everyone else?
No, in my view, in that he's in a desperate position because of the energy crisis. He's agreeing to these terms because of, Iran taking control of the Strait of Hormuz. And I think he's in firmer control of his party, let's say, than Barack Obama was. But beyond that, outside of that, he's in a much weaker political position across sort of American politics among voters in general. And then he's in a very weak position economically with this sort of war of choice that he's carried out. One of the other voices that came out yesterday, and not a traditional critic of Trump, was Senator Roger Wicker. He's the chair of the Armed Services Committee and not a Trump critic. But he wrote about he's concerned that, President Trump has sort of, negotiated away all of the things that the military might have achieved in this attack on Iran. And like bluntly speaking, there were snapback sanctions. There were all these things in the much more complicated Obama agreement. There is no Trump nuclear agreement here. The Memorandum of Understanding covers the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and pushes off all the negotiations about nuclear matters until the next 60 days. And there's, again, nothing about proxies and nothing about missile stockpiles. So
let me get... Yeah, I'm sorry. Finish your thought there, David.
No. So it's just he's in a weaker position politically, and this is a weaker agreement.